You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 496 of the podcast. And in this one, I chat with Riley, who has kindly agreed to share her OCD story with us. And in particular, we talk about how OCD latched onto her sport of swimming, compulsive exercise, her different compulsions, obsessions around being strong, getting therapy, restricting foods, residential treatment, medication, finding joy in activities again, words of hope, and much, much more. And thanks to our podcast partners, NoCD. If OCD is interfering with your life, NoCD can help. Their licensed therapists specialize in exposure and response prevention therapy, the most proven therapy for OCD. With NoCD, effective treatment that is 100% virtual is available for children and adults with OCD. And most members can get started within 7 days on average. No hassle, just real science-backed help and support between sessions. Begin your journey at nocd.com, or I'll put the link in the episode description. So thank you so much to Riley for sharing her story. I deeply appreciate it. And of course, thank you to you guys for listening as always. It means a lot. Without further ado, here is Riley. Welcome to the podcast, Riley.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, it's really nice to meet you. And yeah.
Likewise. Yeah, it's good to have you on. And as you know, I'd love to hear your OCD story. So you can share that in as little or as much detail as you want to give.
Thank you so much. Once again, I know like everybody says it's an honor to be on the show, but I've just been listening to this podcast for so long. So it's really exciting. And one thing though is my dad used to have me listen to these. He was like back when we were really struggling. And I used to compare a lot to some people just because my particular OCD was it latched onto numbers. So and it's not the fault of any person, guest, but it was really just me. But today I won't really be sharing particular numbers, but yeah, I'll just as in light of that, I think. But I'll start off with, I think, I always like to think about like the early signs. A lot of people have been talking about that with me recently. Just thinking back, and my OCD manifested into something kind of like unrelated to some of the early signs, but I think definitely thinking back, it's clear, like we wouldn't have diagnosed it initially, but I used to like have this, I don't know, I'm just jumping right into it, but I used to have this candy drawer where whenever I received anything nice or any treat or something like that, I would almost hoard it, like, oh, I'll save it for when it's the right time to eat it. And I would have like these expired chocolate Santas and things like that just sitting in my drawer, and my brother would always steal them. So that was one of the sillier ones. Something else we noticed was like, I was big on swimming, and eventually my OCD kind of latched onto that. But initially when I was younger, I would always make sure all of my swim gear was like perfectly dry before I put it back in my swim bag. And just some other things. I mean, everybody's, or not everybody, but a lot of people experience people-pleasing tendencies, but I might have been kind of overly sensitive into that, like maybe really dramatic reactions to what most people would consider like very small, kind of like, maybe a little harsh word or something like that. I feel like I would always have a very dramatic reaction. Just this morning, my mom was telling me, whenever I had this lunch container, and I used to use every single container. Like it was like this little bento box thing. And I felt like I had to use every container. I don't know. it was just some silly things like that. I think my second grade teacher even asked me, I was really scared of mistakes in my writing, and she even started having me write in pen, because in pencil I would get so into the erasing, and she saw that, so props to her. But yeah, those were some of the early signs, but the main themes of my OCD were kind of they revolved around exercise and swimming, and also it kind of like became this comorbid eating disorder as well. So that most of those are completely unrelated, but it's kind of weird how the themes change and develop. But for swimming, I had been swimming since I was a kid, like very little. At first I hated it. My mom would give me a chocolate chip per lap. And sometimes I'd just do one lap and be like, I'm done, and give my chocolate chip. But I fell in love with it around the age of like 9 or 10, because I had this one coach who really inspired me, and I started enjoying it. I was initially on more of a low-key team, like non-competitive, just in the summer. But I was like, oh, I really want to pursue this. So I went on to this competitive team that was kind of like going to like, going out of state for meets and just fun things like that. And, I was always hard on myself in swimming, but it was honestly, that was kind of normalized in the culture of the kind of competition. But I think I had this one coach for dryland, and dryland is like for swimmers. It sounds a little counterintuitive, but it's just the workout on land. So like running, push-ups, things like that. But I don't know. Whenever I say dryland, some people are like, what? But we had this one dryland coach who, I think if my OCD was a person, I think it would be this coach. He would oftentimes emphasize like the if you're feeling tired, you're weak, or like if you're late, or like like the little punishments through like exercise. So like kind of like, oh, if you're late, go run a lap, or like go run the mile. And this is a little maybe a little far, but he even wore t-shirts that would just say suffer on them. He's just this kind of dark character, honestly. And it wasn't too out of the ordinary for a lot. I feel like a lot of coaches and things like that are very like, they want to have this vision that they're very like disciplinary, or like, very hard or something like that. But he probably didn't realize he had someone who's vulnerable and was going to take everything he said to be extreme. I was his favorite. I was like, always going above and beyond on all the workouts. That was in quotes. Because we both kind of started to agree that I deserved to do as much exercise as I possibly could. And it became, it was interesting, because as I kind of got obsessed with like, oh, if I do this exercise, I'll go faster. I'll do this exercise, go faster. And then it's like, I just keep doing more and more. My coaches, and it was a little challenging, because the coaches and the dryland one, and then my actual swim one, the parents, they would all praise me. Like, oh my goodness, Riley's going above and beyond. She is like just always putting in this effort and doing extra work. Like on the weekends, she's doing stuff, when really I was, kind of meticulously completing each workout, and often feeling like I wasn't doing enough. And around 12 years old, I began really obsessing over the times. So swimming, it's an individual sport. they have different distances, different strokes, and then they have these standards. So like, like a B time, a double B time, A time, double A, triple A. And it's just this really, of course, my OCD was like, memorize all the times. And I was just, this one event, it was my, best event of a 12-year-old. It's not too intense, but of course in my head it was very intense. And I was consistently 0.3 seconds away from this one cut for a meet. It's like they have like, you get a certain cut to go to a meet, a specific time. And I was just always 0.3 away. It was very interesting because I kept getting the exact same time that was always 0.3 away, no matter how much I was doing. And of course the OCD started saying like, do more, do more, do more. And it was every single meet, just tears, like all around this one event, which really, in hindsight, obviously wasn't, it was 12 years old. It was not going to make or break my career at all. If anything, the worry about this event is what, I don't know, made the career a little bit less pursuable. But I had one last meet to achieve it, the time to get the cut for this upcoming meet. And it was the last chance, and COVID happened and shut it all down. So that was definitely, I was so shocked. I was also, I think, I definitely could admit it at the time, but I was relieved. And I was frustrated that I was relieved because COVID eliminated the chance to get it one more time. But I think I lost a little bit of hope that I was going to get it initially. So it felt like, okay, well, you couldn't have gotten it anyway. Like it kind of took the blame off me, I guess, which was hard to come to terms that I was actually relieved by that. And yeah, COVID started, and that was obviously challenging for everyone. I think for swimming, obviously the pools were closed. It's too much interaction, too much, contamination or whatever. And they started giving us online cross training. So like on Zoom, they would like give us workouts. It wasn't with that one dryland coach, but it was just with our normal swim coaches. They would instruct us to like go on different runs. And I started having this routine. I think when everything kind of went crazy during COVID, I guess, I really wanted something structured. I think a lot of people can relate to that, but I think the OCD wanted something super structured, like something very rigid and some routine we could fall back on. And it became, I always had this like little stretching routine kind of throughout my life. Cause I used to do dance for like a little bit of time. So I would just have that. But it became, during COVID, it became this like hours and hours of just, and it wasn't even stretches at a certain point. It was like push-ups and sit-ups and pull-ups and the splits. Like it's just this weird combination of anything anybody had ever told me that maybe I should do. So because I always took advice very literally, I guess. So it's like, they might have said in passing, like, oh, you should work on this stretch or this exercise. And then I would take it to the extreme and be like, okay, I'll do this many a day. And then it became this really long, intensive exercise session each day, which I think was the first time it was like very obviously that is a compulsion. Like it was so I could never skip it. I remember some days we were traveling one day and I was doing it in the airport, just like on the floor and the carpet. It was, this wasn't during COVID, but before COVID, or even after when the planes were, available. And then, like I said, they were instructing, runs, and they're telling us to do these like run workouts and other workouts just to like stay in swimming shape. They're trying to emphasize cross training. And I would always go to the extreme. Like, I started doing long distance running, which, I started doing with my dad and brother, which was initially kind of supposed to be like, oh, let's try this new thing. I hadn't tried running before, but I took it to the extreme, always going these really long distances. And I even started, sometimes it was so overwhelming, the thoughts of like, about like, I would just be constantly thinking like, what's my pace? Could I be going a little bit faster? Could I be like taking this extra steps here? And it became this really elaborate, it was so overwhelming that I would end up crying while exercise. Like I would be, or even like yelling out of frustration. It was very intense. I like, my whole family remembers when I used to do this stretching routine, like I was talking about, there was a pull-up section that became so stressful for me that I would just be like yelling. It was like 6 a.m. in the morning because I woke up early to do it. And because I had this interesting way of counting. It was like, this many pull-ups, but it was like 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, and then it was like 5, 5, 5. It was just this, I don't even remember exactly what it was. And then if I had touched the door frame or something on accident, because the pull-up bar was in our door frame, it would like, start the whole entire routine over. Or my dog at the time, if if somehow he like walked past me during, it was very complex. I would have to start the whole thing over. So it just became this like, so kind of scary that my parents were like, what is happening? Like she should not be crying or like yelling while, exercising. Like they started doing some research and they have been so supportive the whole process, but, they were like, whoa, this is not normal. So it started to kind of realize that it was problematic. And I think in my head, this is where this kind of theme of weak versus strong came up. And I had this obsession over being the strongest I could be. And the worst thing in the world, the worst thing possible was being weak at that time. It was like, it was just kind of crazy to think about now, but yeah, that was my main priority. And I would do anything to make myself feel strong, or, asking reassurance too. That totally came into reassurance. Just like, oh, like, will this help me be strong? Or like, did I do enough exercise to be strong? Or like, what if I become just things like that, where I had to have these specific answers. And another kind of unfortunate thing is, for a lot of runners, they can like post their runs or things like that, or any athletic thing like bikes or runs or swims, if it's, depends on the thing. And I would get a lot of praise for these like really extreme runs, or extreme athletic things, and people would be like, wow, good job. Like, it was just this praise for like, and wow, she's 13 and she's doing all this cool stuff, and it was, I became obsessing over, oh, well, look, this one got a comment, like, good job. Like, okay, that was because I got that pace and burned that many calories and run that many miles on this particular route. And then I'm looking at other people's, because this is a whole social media platform, and I'm looking at like the different distances. And I'm, it's funny because my dad was the one who got me into running initially, because he's always enjoyed like kind of like just being athletic and being active, never in an unhealthy sense like I was, but I was comparing myself to all like him and his friends, who's grown men who are obviously like developed and able to run faster or further or whatever.
Yeah.
But I was comparing myself to them and their likes and their, whatnot. So it was just, the social media definitely took a toll, and it was definitely fueling just this kind of OCD that really started forming. And then we returned to back to swimming, and that was when it got really, really intense. It was already pretty intense, but I wrote down some of the compulsions I remember, and my mom was helping me kind of brainstorm this list. But it just got so intense. For swimming particularly, my coach would have to stop me from like holding my breath. I thought that I always tried to do the hardest thing, because I thought like if you do the hardest thing, then you become strong. So I that was the thought process there. And I would be holding my breath for because breath control is important in swimming, but not for like trying to go on 3 laps. Like that's not going to be beneficial at a certain point. And it's getting dangerous. Like if you're holding a breath while you're already in a bad headspace, it's like the recipe for disaster. Luckily I was always safe. But swimming, I would swim butterfly, which is supposedly the hardest stroke, as much as I could. So like if there was like a set where you can choose your stroke to try to like work on something new, often that's trying to like get on maybe a stroke you haven't worked on in a bit, or you don't want to overuse certain muscles. So it's like, oh, try this new stroke. But I always chose this one stroke, even for like cool down when you're supposed to go like easy. I would be trying to do this butterfly, and it became this crazy ritual, and it was just unhealthy, and it wasn't going to help my swimming career, but I thought it would. So yeah, on the other, like I also had other kind of random themes popping up. So I would just randomly, like this is more like in the swimming gear kind of thing, I had to put all my towels the right way on like to the drying rack. So just like random things like that. And I would get so mad at my siblings. I have a brother and a sister, and I would get so mad because they also like to swim and for fun, and they would put the towel on the wrong way. And it was just a big event. And I had checking my alarm. I know a lot of people have that. My parents stopped letting me set my own alarm because I would just constantly check, hoping to make sure I could wake up early enough. Like it had a whole kind of trickling down effect. I started having interesting compulsions that were just to try to get more exercise in, but it was like, logically, it was just it wouldn't have helped. I don't know what it would have helped with, but like standing all the time, trying to like get, you know, whatever instead of sitting, like while I'm eating, while we're watching a show, literally tensing my muscles. Like I was just so obsessed with being strong. And yeah, aside from actual exercise, of course, I would be doing a lot of that, but just random things that, or like, oh, I always took the longest route. So if it was like, if it was a little thing, like in my house, we have a hallway and I always have to get to the corner to try to not cut that tiny little bit. It was probably like 2 inches, right? But my brain was like, nope, we have to go all the way to the corner. I would sometimes even just like walk in a zigzag. And when school got back, it was like I was going up and down the stairs. I was standing in class, which was a little weird. Definitely socially awkward, I would say. But the OCD did not care about that. And yeah, even at lunchtime, sometimes I wouldn't even barely show up for lunch. I would just be up and down the stairs, counting steps, just random things. Some other kind of fun ones, but not fun, but funny ones that I think back is I had this weird doormat compulsion where I don't even know what the theme was on that one, because I felt like we never really got to the reason. It didn't have to do with being strong, but it was just this kind of random, I couldn't get off the doormat at all. Like I kept wiping my feet, and I never really had any contamination themes. So it wasn't related to, trying to clean my feet or making sure I didn't get any residue in the house. But I don't really know what that one was about, to be honest. But yeah, around 14 years old, my parents confronted who was my current swim coach, asking like, is this normal? Because, there is sometimes really intense regimens people follow to be swimmers. But she was like, no, that's not, she was like, that's not normal. And she was definitely, I think, my favorite coach I've ever had. She had a lot of emphasis on, well, that kind of team was a little bit toxic in certain ways. She was emphasizing that we needed a balance between swimming and life, something that my OCD totally thought was a lie, but I think she suggested I start seeing someone. She initially suggested, I think, a self-esteem, like, confidence coach, I think, because we didn't know what was happening. And eventually I ended up with a therapist who fairly quickly diagnosed me with OCD around this whole exercise thing. But she was not trained in OCD, and she was like, I would like to like transfer you to someone who's a specialist. And given that we had just come out of COVID, it was all mental health providers were very swamped. And it was hard to find someone with a good specialty. We ended up with just providers that really, to be honest, made it worse at some points. Like, one of them ended up talking about like weighing myself, one of the providers I ended up with, because they were initially worried it was going into the eating restriction realm. And then I became obsessed over that. So it was very counterproductive. I became very preoccupied with weight, and one other provider suggested something about caloric intake, and just very unhelpful because especially my OCD was very into numbers. So it was immediately latching on to any new numbers, any new data that it could analyze. And eventually, one coach in the swim team kind of indirectly suggested that it was a coach. I wasn't on their team yet, but I wanted to get onto their team. It was like the big final, like, the senior team, and I really wanted to be on their team. And we were having a swim party, end of year party, and they kind of insinuated that the swimmers who had the cupcakes that were out for them would, he ended up kind of giving them a punishment set the next day of this really challenging workout because they had a cupcake at a party that was literally celebrating them. So my OCD took that and ran. I came home from that like kind of party thing. I was, I don't remember it too well, but my mom says I was shaking and like I was because I was always so into food, even through the exercise. I was always big on chocolate and just big meals. Anybody who met me would say like, wow, she eats a lot. Like, and I was fine with that. But it was this coach that said it while I was in a vulnerable place, and it just totally spiraled. And for some reason that really stuck with me. And I started another thing that kind of promoted it was this. I think I started seeing some sort of content on social media too. Like, I think what I'm guessing happened. I don't remember too well, but I probably just saw one video and was like, oh, this person suggests this diet. And then the algorithm probably was like, oh, she's interested in that. Let's give her more and more and more. And I started seeing a lot of like restriction content, like kind of glamorizing eating disorders and suggesting that especially women should restrict their food. And, I was 14 years old. I was kind of like, these people seem reliable. It's not true at all, but it was just pretty terrible content that I was seeing. Now that I think about it, it's, unfortunate that because the algorithm probably knows demographics of people. So they probably knew around my age group. And that's a little bit saddening to think that they would like promote that content to me specifically. And I didn't even have like Instagram or anything that's often viewed as problematic. It was literally YouTube that I just had this like, I saw a video and then all of a sudden it was what I eat in a day as an athlete or like to lose weight or something like that. And weight had never been a problem for me. It was never an issue in my head or physically. Like I was never like in a space where I would be medically required to lose weight. So it was just all counterproductive to really anything. And I started latching on to that. And it became this all these behaviors revolving around food. So it started to become, restricting food to the point where it's just like not even really able to make my own plates of food just because my parents couldn't really rely on feeding myself accurately or adequately. And my swimming kind of as a result, it's probably a result of many things. My times kind of plateaued. So I wasn't really dropping too much time. And in my head, I was like, that means I need to restrict more. So it became this really dangerous combo of kind of OCD about being strong, but all these things feeding into it, like exercise and food. And that kind of over exercise, malnourishment, it's just such a dangerous um, combination that I ended up just being not very stable at home or at school. I just felt like I was constantly compulsing. We were still trying to find therapists. Um, I, my mom was saying, she was like, you should tell him I had a very high Y box score. So it was just like in the extreme. It was just getting to this point where I couldn't function where I was. So the next step was going to be residential treatment. So I'm honestly very grateful that I had access to. I know a lot of families, it's hard to even afford something like that. And I also was able to have my family visit, but it was also the treatment I received was just a little bit not the right fit, and it ended up making it a little bit worse, if I'm being honest. I started at an OCD residential treatment, and there weren't a lot of other people who had. I mean, I would say it's probably mostly kids with contamination themed or morality. I met a few with those, but it was hard to really, I think it might be easier if you can kind of relate to the other youth who are with you, but it was, very, and I don't think the therapists or providers there were super experienced with this kind of what seems like kind of an eating disorder, but is also very rooted in OCD. So it was kind of an interesting comorbidity there. And I ended up going to eating disorder inpatient, where I was declining pretty fast. And at that point, they knew it was very OCD themed, but they didn't have the supports. And the most kind of pressing issue is the fact that I was not super medically stable. So they wanted to, while of course the mental part is important, it was going to come second while they were trying to kind of stabilize. So I ended up hospitalized a few times and ended up at a different inpatient. And it did stabilize. They ended up stabilizing me. But it was really hard. There was a lot of over medication, kind of, almost to the point of like sedating me almost. And I also, this is kind of a little bit funny, but we were trying so many different medications, but I ended up on one of the ketamine trials. And this is a little bit funny, but when I told my brother, he wanted to send me a disco ball to enhance the experience. But I don't know. There's a lot of interesting medication journeys or med ventures, but I think medication was very complicated. I think I was still in a place where it was just, I think my brain had too much going on and my body had just been through the ringer. And it was very hard to get me out of the residential. And I had picked up compulsions from other eating disorder patients. So like breaking up food into tiny pieces, or even like compulsive self-harm. I had these like bedtime rituals. It was very problematic, to be honest. And we were, looking back, it's hard to know what would have been the best path. But I think residential was definitely a challenging time. One thing I put in, I have these like notes here, but I put in my notes, one thing that was really special to me though is while I was away, it was about for 5 months I was away in different facilities. They were all out of state. So I was pretty far from my family, but they all sometimes they were able to visit, but they all sent me notes and letters. I just think it was so special because I got I don't know, I remember my grandpa would send me like, pages long of letters, and nobody in my family or friends had really like had an experience where their child or friend or, daughter is in a, different state for mental health issues. So it was just this really heartwarming kind of like to receive that mail, I think was really special. And I still have some of the notes. I put all the like notes up on my door, and it's that was like it was a very hard time, but that's one thing I look on, and it definitely helped to receive kind of the love, I think, to know, because it often felt like I was being a burden because I was very resistant to any treatment. But I think it was always helpful that they would send those. When I finally made it home, uh, the most I was still in a pretty bad place. I was still not very independent. I was in partial hospitalization for a little bit for eating disorder, and then I kind of graduated and went to this OCD intensive outpatient program, which I was super resistant to, but it's where I met my current therapist. And that was where really started seeing, I mean, it wasn't big steps. It was the tiniest little steps. It was like this, like, okay, maybe I might potentially not walk around the corner. And it was like, she was just like always supporting, even just the tiny, it wasn't these big leaps or anything, but it was like just moving the needle just a little bit. And I was put on this virtual eating disorder care because I was medically stabilized enough to be okay in that sense. I did end up getting a diagnosis of anorexia, but I often think that it was almost like OCD I don't know. It was I sometimes I don't know if I totally agree with that. There's obviously a lot of signs, and I can see why they would diagnose that particular one, but I think what really needed to be treated mentally in order for me to succeed was the OCD part. So I ended up going into the intensive outpatient, which really helped me. I finally returned to school with virtual care still, and I was not very functional, pretty isolating. And then, I don't know, it was interesting because little things just started like just improving a little bit. And it was this really slow process. I got a job as a swim coach, which I was very worried about because I was like, this swim coach almost ruined my life. But I was like, I don't want to be that coach. But I actually started to kind of, after all those kind of like really traumatic even kind of experiences with swimming, it was initially very stressful, but I started kind of finding again the kind of joy I used to find in it just from coaching. I couldn't go in the pool. It was very like I was not able to it was it was an exposure to even just be at the pool while other people were swimming. But I also started teaching lessons, and it started like coming back a little bit of joy. I started going to my school. I joined my school's choir again, which I was initially excited about, but that was really, I think I'd always found joy in singing, even in like residential. I was often like doing compulsions pretty much all day, but I would stop to go in the karaoke session when they'd host little karaoke nights. I would always want to do that. So I always like singing. Um, and then I ended up doing this mental health project with my community, a local community service uh, organization. And that really, like, I didn't really know too much about mental health advocacy. I knew I needed mental health help, but I was like, I didn't know it. And I totally fell in love with this whole field of mental health advocacy. And I developed this interest in psychology and neuroscience. And it was such a weird flip flop because initially I was the one needing psychological help, definitely. But I think understanding the physical processes that were going on in my brain have really helped validate like my current experiences. Like, for instance, like, um, I have a shirt. This is kind of just anecdotal, but I have a shirt that says, ask me about my overreactive amygdala. So it's like the fear center involved with OCD. It's basically like OCD just sounds the fear alarm at things it's not supposed to, like a doormat. It's sounding the fear alarm at a doormat, not a bear chasing you. And I for some reason I found like comfort in knowing like there are physical things happening. It's not just all in my head. And I ended up more recent, or okay, so I started like getting better on certain compulsions, and more recently I've made really strong successes in food and exercise. So recently I've been eating, like, I had a lot of fear foods that I just would not eat or like would not even think about eating. But nowadays, I have ice cream almost every night just because summer, it's good. And I don't think about the calories intake and outtake or in and out for like exercise. I go on runs because I want to. And I listen to my music. Sometimes I'm just like smiling the whole run. It's complete opposite because it's like because I wasn't allowed to do exercise for a while because of that. So it's just this new gratitude. And I go to the gym and really just enjoy it, like with my friends. For food, I recently started having like things with like more normal like sugars, I guess. So like a typical brownie or typical cookie instead of like the kind of healthy version, whatever that means. And yeah, one thing I want to talk a tiny bit about is I recently applied to colleges. I just graduated high school, but I I think that was a little bit hard because of the mental health break, but I did end up kind of finding that there are different options that work for me, even if it's not the most prestigious school. But I think a lot of schools did decline me probably because the time it could be a lot of things, but there was a pattern that was so much that I almost feel like, they started to not acknowledge the mental health struggles. But that's kind of a different story. But I think it's kind of all clearing up now, especially. And I think, yeah, it's been quite the it's kind of weird to say journey, but like I feel like it's definitely been something like that. And yeah, I think it's definitely had a positive at the end here net impact. Now that I'm, going to study psychology and neuroscience, I participate in a lot of mental health advocacy, and it's much easier and more manageable now. So I think, yeah, that's kind of, I think that's kind of as of now, kind of the OCD story. Yeah.
Wow, thank you for sharing it. And yeah, it shows you how intense the compulsions can get, and affecting your weight and fitness and all of that, and how dangerous that could have been for you. I've done an episode before on how some eating disorders can sometimes really be OCD or be viewed from an OCD lens, and I think
Mm-hmm.
your story speaks to that. So I'm really glad you got the help you needed, and your family were really supportive. And yeah, wow. What words of hope for anyone listening? What would you tell them?
I said this a little bit, but I think a lot of people kind of emphasize like, treatment won't work unless you're 100% like into it. I do agree that it's a two-way street. Like you have to put work in to see success. But I think in my head it was like it has to be this big leap. Like I'll just completely stop compulsions the next day. Obviously that would be nice if I did that, but I think that made it really intimidating. And I think really just small wins, just slow and small wins. Like I didn't do compulsions for 5 minutes and like start there. And it's like you just take these tiny little steps of like, okay, today I'm like not going to do this. Or like you just kind of like very small. Of course, it can be big and you can take big leaps too. But I think don't be afraid to just go in with a very small goal, and you don't have to take these massive steps, because I found sometimes I would be like, that intimidated me so much that I just wouldn't do any steps. And it was just kind of like this all or nothing. I think there is definitely some middle ground, and it's important to just take the small steps.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and I guess I'm struck by, the thing that made you really struggle with OCD was like extreme, excessive, all or nothing exercise, that kind of mentality. And actually, the solution for you was a much slower approach, which is complete opposite to the thing that was making you struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, what else did I say? There was something else that's slipping my mind. Pick up the phone and call. Let's go to the 14-year-old you. What would you tell her?
She was very stubborn. She probably wouldn't listen to too much of like unless it had some reassurance involved. She probably wouldn't listen to most people, but I think I would tell her just ooh, I probably she wouldn't listen to anything about exercise for me, I think. But I think I would just tell her that she's loved, and she has family and friends that will still love her. And just a reminder, because I think sometimes she would forget that, or feel just because she was so the OCD really opposed. It was not very a positive effect on people around her. So I think it wanted to isolate her, but I think just remembering that she's loved, and there are people who care about her.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. Important message. And you got a billboard where you live? What do you want written on that billboard?
Um, I think it's very simple, kind of basic, but just you are enough. I think I always struggled with that, and that wouldn't have been a reassurance, but I think because I hadn't had to have specific words written, but I think just reminders like that help people be less vulnerable to, you know, random swim coaches bringing them down. But just little reminders like that, I think little positive things would be helpful to see, like on your drive to work or wherever. Yeah.
Yeah, they would be good. Amazing. Thank you for sharing your story. And is there anything else you wish you could have said today?
I think that's all.
No, well, I'm really happy you're doing a lot better. You're managing it and getting your life back on track.
Thank you so much. This is so surreal to be on this podcast.
No worries, my pleasure. And thanks to your dad for sharing it with you in the first place. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, you can click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.